Okay.
We're up.
Dean, we're live.
We're live. All right, let's jump into this. People have been waiting, and God knows they can't wait to hear from you.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay. Okay, so I had a little bit of echo because I think I had the visual side up. But Dean, let's get right in. So last week we talked about getting and keeping the audience attention. It was a great session. We had hundreds of registrations. And during that webinar, you mentioned that you can actually anticipate what a B2B webinar audience would think and feel during a presentation. So do you remember saying this?
I do remember saying that. Yes, it's a bold claim. Yes.
Okay. So right now we have the title slide for the webinar up. You and I are on screen. So I'm curious, what does the audience think when they come into a session and they see this title slide?
Pretty much every standard slide has its own kind of like covert and overt message to it. And you can anticipate what an audience is going to feel. We're not going to go through every one of the slides. I think we're just going to talk about this one. But what you're saying or what the audience thinks when they're in the session and they see it, because a lot of corporate employees, they think like, okay, I'm in the right place at the right time. Because a lot of them are double booked. I know when I was in corporate, double booked or even triple booked. And they want to check out the first few minutes of your webinar, the courtesy attention period we talked about last week.
Sure.
Decide if they should stay. And the very first thing they should feel is relief that they clicked into the right session. So you want them to know that they're in the right place at the right time, which means your title slide needs to, obviously have the title and the same title as all the registration pages and emails and LinkedIn posts and stuff. And it should have the date and sometimes even the time of the event and maybe the company logo.
Okay. It seems too simple to mess up, essentially.
You'd think so, right? Companies mess it up all the time. But if you know that you want the audience to feel relief that they're in the right place at the right time, then it is hard to mess up your title slide.
Okay, good. So I think we did it right. But something else you said last week was that people essentially waste the audience attention in webinars with presentation by putting up an agenda. But you also said that for interview style webinars, no one uses agendas and it's actually a missed opportunity. So since this is an interview style webinar, Maxim is going to put up an agenda. So he's backstage here with us, filling in for Luke this week. And he's loaded all of the 8 topics we're going to talk about into the topic feature here in the studio.
Nice. I like that. Yeah. So let's see. Is it up yet? Yeah, I'm in the right place. That's the first one. So Maxim, if we go to the next one, which is, wow, how are they going to?
Here it is.
Okay. So one point about agendas is they should be interesting. You're always focused on the audience's attention, and nothing kills audience attention faster than throwing a boring list right at people. So either write each bullet like it's a headline for something you want people to be curious about, or write it like a narrative or an internal monologue. Then it's not a list, it's a flow that pulls the reader through to the end. And then, so after the title slide, what you go up, the thing they should think next is, wow, how are they going to resolve that? And what's happening here is this thought comes right after the title slide, right when where they know they're in the right webinar. And the last week we talked about how instead of opening with an agenda or housekeeping stuff, we open with a gap, right? And a gap is there's a reality, and we break that reality. Like X was true for a long time, but a change has happened, and now X isn't true anymore. You open your webinar by showing X, then showing that X was never true or isn't true anymore or is still true, but not for you people watching this, presentation. And at the end of your opening, people wonder like, wow, how are they going to resolve that? And that's how you show them during that critical courtesy attention phase right at the beginning that you're worth the time investment, attention investment, emotional investment to stick around because they want to know how you're going to resolve this break in their reality.
Got it. And then after that is when people should introduce themselves and show why they're the expert, right? So I guess this is the point where the audience tells themselves, okay, this person knows what they're talking about. They have a solution that's maybe worked for other people. So now it's safe that I can go vouch to my company that this is an okay company. Essentially bring it back to them.
Right. You're showing them that you're someone who's comfortable with the material and they're good to like settle in for it.
Got it. Okay. So I have a question about how to do that though.
Okay.
Because for most webinars, someone welcomes the audience. So that's like the very first thing that happens. Are you saying that people shouldn't introduce themselves? should know?
So here's an example, right? If you've ever watched any of my own sessions, of course, I'm usually like behind the scenes, so you don't know which corporate clients I've written for on any particular one. But in my own sessions, if I was you, we would say, "Hi, I'm Tim Mitten. More about me in a minute. Now that XYZ is possible using AI, some things are," I'm just making this up. "Now that XYZ is possible using AI, some things that we all knew about ABC have changed. It looks like going forward, instead of blah, 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 whatever, establish the gap at your opening, right? Reality, break the reality. And then once that's done, you move into the actual introduction for yourself. So just,
Okay.
"Hi, I'm Tim. More about me in a second," then go right into your gap.
Okay, that makes sense. The gap again.
I
But
love the gaps.
yeah, it's super useful. But once it's time to introduce yourself, what should people do here, Dean?
Well, think of the opening, like introducing yourself and establishing that you're a safe choice for this audience, like sort of like Act One. You want to spend as little time in Act One as possible. And that means you should quickly introduce your gap, your opening, to grab their attention. And then as quickly as you can, without seeming rushed, dispense with your own introduction. Your introduction is as much about attitude as anything else. Here's what I mean. You know you're the expert here, right? You're the one educating the audience. So your attitude is, of course, I'm Tim Mitten. And of course, I'm interested in an expert in this whatever topic. Here's who I am. Let's get back to the main event. Think about it from the audience's point of view. They came to hear about your topic. They don't want to waste 30 or 60 minutes of their life with someone who isn't well informed, isn't excited to be there, isn't sure of their material, and like isn't comfortable. You assert, and I use that word very carefully, you assert that you're the right person to listen to right now. Then you have the rest of the webinar to show that you're the right person.
Got it. And overall, should you keep this short?
Yeah, as short as it can be, as long as you still provide enough detail to show the audience you're comfortable and an expert.
Okay. Okay. So I'm curious if we maybe flip it and think about it the other way. What are some mistakes that you see people make during intros?
People try to be funny. I mostly do B2B, so maybe in a B2C world, funny can work. But in B2B, like I promise you, whatever joke you think is funny, it's a lot funnier in your head than it will be when you say it out loud. So it's almost always a mistake to try to be funny. People try to overcompensate by stacking lots of titles and credentials and experience to establish their expert status.
Right.
And I mean, a lot of people do it. Don't hurt me. You know what I mean by don't hurt me?
No. And I'm going to ask, this is another Deanism.
Yeah.
What's a don't hurt me?
Okay. You see this more in like where a technical expert is a presenter. They don't spend a lot of time talking to audiences. They're not comfortable. And they'll say something like, "Now I'm John. I'm the senior engineer of blah. I'm not management, or I'm not in sales, or I'm not in marketing, or this problem existed before I joined the company," right? All of those translate to "please don't hurt me."
Got it.
But you can't be the expert and in control of your material and excited about your topic, and at the same time tell the audience, "please don't hurt me," right? A milder form of this is when you see this even more often. You open the session by apologizing for something. "Sorry we were late getting started. Sorry it looks like some people can't hear us. You notice we didn't apologize when we came in, even though we were a little late on this one," right? "Sorry I'm nervous about public speaking," right? Whatever. The audience wants to relax into the event. Even though it's a B2B kind of webinar, technically it's like a work event. They want to relax into the event. And no sane person relaxes when the person at the wheel is scared. So your intro is as much about attitude as it is about credentials and experience. You gently but firmly assert who you are, and then you move on to talking to the audience about the audience. And I just spent a lot longer describing how you introduce yourself than you would ever actually spend introducing yourself. But it's important, right? If I'm in your audience, I want to feel that my time and attention are in good hands and that I can safely believe everything you tell me for the rest of our time together.
Yeah, it makes sense. But let's keep going. So the next stage is we want the future that they're describing, the speaker. So what's happening here?
So you've opened up the gap. you've established yourself as with expert authority, and then well, let's talk about three concepts. There are overall three concepts for the entire thing. There's the negative present. If the present was a negative, there's no problem to solve. So why are you on this webinar in the first place, right? There's the positive future and the negative future. At this point in our presentation, we're dealing with the positive future. You want to talk about benefits. You want to talk about what customers or people who did what you recommended, or did what you did, or bought what you sold. Either something good happened to them and they have something good that they didn't have before, or they no longer have something negative that they did have before. And if what you sell is complicated, it's worth repeating. This is about benefits, not features. We get into features of your product or your service later in the presentation, but
Okay.
it's benefits and showing them, the happy future if people do what other people have done and basically, bought something from you.
Got it. And I'm guessing by negative present, you don't mean that you got me a bad birthday gift.
Yeah, no, I really need a new name for that.
It's okay. I like it. Okay. So we tell the audience about the positive future, and then the next thought they should have is, okay, this will help us get what we want. But at the same time, it's not necessarily like our fault that we don't already have it. So why is it important to tell them that it's not their fault?
Yeah, I tell you what, this is the thought that people should have at this point in a webinar or a presentation. And this is the one that, oddly enough, people find most surprising. It's like, why do I have to tell them like anything like that? And I mean, the thing is, nobody's going to sit around for an hour and listen to you blaming them for their own negative present that they're living in. So even if their bad situation or their lack of something or their need is their own fault, it's still never completely their fault. You always have to talk about a reason that their negative present exists external to them. So, I came up through tech, so it couldn't be cost effectively solved before now, or the solution didn't exist before now because we invented it, or
Sure.
some other problem or thing had to happen first before this problem could be fixed, right? Something else needed to happen or be invented or whatever. And now that we can do that, you couldn't do Uber before cloud existed, that kind of thing, right? And so and like at least 3G or 4G phones, were available. And so there's some other problem or event that needed to be resolved first, like whatever. You absolve them of blame, and then you can talk to them about getting them away from this negative present and into a positive future.
Okay. So you mentioned Uber, but you should do this for B2B audiences as well, right?
Oh yeah, I pretty much only work for B2B. This is critical. I could spend 2 hours just explaining all the reasons why making the audience feel like their negative present is not their fault is absolutely critical for a B2B audience. Like, do not skip this step because you think it's like silly because you're not selling soap or something.
Okay, fair enough. So let's keep going. Next one on our list. So it's complicated. I don't really understand it, but they've already done all the thinking and all the work on it. Now, when I read this on the list before we went live, Dean, I thought that this one was really interesting. And for me, it was interesting because this is where we actually talk to the audience about something technical.
Yeah, this is the part where the speaker gets to geek out, right? And so this should be the reaction after you finish explaining how your solution works. You were transparent, you explained and listed your features. You showed a complicated diagram or workflow because you wanted to slightly overwhelm the audience, right? Slightly. And they came away thinking that this is too big to do for themselves because, in software and in tech especially, there's always a danger the customer is going to figure they could build it themselves rather than buy it from you, right? So it's like, okay, this is too complicated. It is too big for us to do ourselves. But thankfully, your company has already worked it out, right? Put in the effort, invested the resources, whatever. And a positive future if they give you money, right? Bluntly. So there you go.
So it's my favorite part of the webinar, and you said it. It's the part where you get to geek out over the product, essentially.
Yeah, what happened before is we used to introduce the speaker, no gap, right? Introduce the speaker, throw up an agenda, and then go right into the geeking out. How does it work section? And that would be almost the entirety. And that's I think we'll get into that shortly, but it was a bad idea. That's one of the reasons like CTAs didn't work.
You see this all the time, by the way. Tons of companies do this. Yeah.
So yeah. And I mean, it really is one of the reasons why we used to have so much trouble getting people to respond to a CTA. We didn't open with a gap, and we just beat their attention to death, and then we wondered why nothing ever came of it. So now we start with a structure where we slightly, not much really, but slightly reduce the how does it work or geeking out part of the presentation, just so we can frame up things ahead of time so that they can be addressed. And like, you also want to set up the audience's predisposition, so to speak, so that when you get to the call to action, they're more predisposed to, I use predispose a lot in that explanation, predisposed to pay attention to it and comply with it.
Got it. So this is essentially the meat of the session, right? It's the biggest part of the webinar.
Yeah, people register and attend to get these kind of details, right? Nobody watching this right now came here to stare at you and me and our faces for half an hour. It's just not a thing. They came for the details. And again, like, the details aren't the problem. The details don't kill the audience's attention. Not establishing the other stuff, like the positive feature ahead of time, was the problem, and why the details ended up boring the audiences and they would bounce out of there.
Yeah. Well, let's hope they didn't come to stare at us.
Yeah.
Okay. So you talked about the negative present. You talked about the positive feature. So I'm guessing the next section, it has to be the negative feature. And this is where people say, we don't want the problem of not doing anything, right? So we need to actually make a move, take action, and do something about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, we spent a very small amount of time describing a future where their negative present wasn't resolved. And so it continued on into their future, right? In B2B, you don't have a lot of options here. So it's usually something like you'll lose money every day until this problem's fixed, or your competitor will gain on you every day until this problem is fixed. And so the challenge is that in B2B, there's no scarcity. So urgency is almost impossible to achieve with anything external. It has to be felt internally.
Okay. Can you expand on this a little bit, Dean? I think this is an interesting point.
Okay. So in B2B, right, you can't say there are only a limited number of units left to buy, or we won't sell this product anymore after a certain date, or this discount, you only get this discount if you buy by the end of the quarter. Like, everyone knows that's bullshit. In B2B, companies don't buy things that they can't also buy tomorrow. Continuity is a very big thing in B2B. What if they resell it? All of a sudden, they can't get any more of it. It doesn't make any sense. And urgency tied to dates doesn't work very well either. I did mostly enterprise sales, and so these were like big deals, and they would take a long time to eventually close. But you can't say like, oh, you'll get 10% off if the deal closes by the end of this quarter. That's bullshit. They'll come back next year and say, hey, remember that discount from last year? We'll take that now, and you'll give it to them, because if you don't, your competitor will. So scarcity isn't really a thing in B2B. That's why you describe an internally focused negative future, like the solution saves you money and you're losing money every day you don't own it. Something like that.
Yeah. There's definitely no scarcity in B2B. That totally makes sense. Okay. So that brings us into the end. The call to action, the CTA. This is where people need to think, okay, I'm going to stop worrying about this. I'm going to do it. People like me have the same problem. They have a solution. I'm going to do something about it.
Yeah. CTAs are another topic we could talk about for 2 hours, easy.
Wow.
But at this point in your presentation, you briefly described a negative future after giving them the details of what you sell and showing them the positive future and the negative present before that. So then you give them one, maybe two possible calls to action. And you can either give them hard or soft CTAs, but never a vague CTA.
Okay.
Never.
And what do you mean by vague? Something like visit our website? I see this.
Yeah.
I see that all the time in webinars.
Yeah, that one sucks. That sucks bad, right? Like, be very clear about what their next steps could be. A softer CTA, like get them to subscribe to your newsletter, like a nurturing campaign, like subscribing to a newsletter, or clicking to see a video or see a recorded demo. A harder CTA, and I don't mean the harder as in more difficult, but harder as in a more specific you will perform an action kind of CTA, is they could join. Some Salesforces have open Q&As like once a week or once a month, where basically like all their prospects and leads are invited to come in and just ask questions about the product, or they can book a discovery call or a one-to-one demo, right?
Mhm.
So that graduates them from a lead to a prospect. But either way, hard or soft, because you've taken them through this series of stages in your webinar, the call to action is a way to move away from a negative future and toward a positive future, because they identify with it now because you framed it up from the beginning instead of just dumping them in the details. And so they think, okay, yeah, I can take that step. Taking that step is what people like me would do.
Right. So making it all make sense, bringing the audience on the full journey, essentially.
Yeah, the audience goes on a journey, like an emotional and intellectual journey. And that's a great webinar. Like that's a webinar that creates change. And every webinar is supposed to create change, or else why did we put in all that work?
Right. Yeah, no, it makes total sense. You need to frame it up from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, Dean, well, I think that covers our 8 topics that we wanted to go through during our discussion today. We're going to have Q&A come up in a second, but I think before we did want to put a poll out to the audience here to get some of their feedback specifically. So let's see if we can launch this on how long people spend preparing the content for their webinars. So I think it's an interesting question. Everyone has a different style. I'm curious,
Yeah.
maybe you could share what the audience votes. What do you do personally?
If it's going to be me, it comes down to whether or not I'm going to be scripted or not. And if I'm scripted, you're working off of for my clients, usually about half of them want to be scripted and half of them don't. And writing the script, it normally takes me about 3 minutes of writing for every 1 minute of whatever is said on screen.
That makes
So
sense.
roughly a 3 to 1.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and that includes like editing and going back and making sure that I call forward to things and call back to other things, how I like to do that, and how I like to build in the narrative things like the interstitials, like, all these companies have come together. There's going to big shakeout. One of them is going to dominate this market. We are not that company. Those kind of like the example from last week and stuff. All right. So generally speaking, 3 minutes for every 1 minute, if it's fully scripted. If it's not scripted, then it comes down to whether or not with the client we're going to do. Do you know the difference between a run through and a rehearsal?
No,
Sometimes called a walkthrough and a rehearsal.
Yeah. Maybe you can explain it even for
very familiar in corporate terms. Like everyone who's ever worked in any company has been through both, or probably only been through the run through / walkthrough. A walkthrough or a run through, different names, is where someone says, like someone's boss says, okay, like, run through your slides for me. And they'll say, okay, now slide 3 comes up. So on this slide, I'm going to talk about X. In a rehearsal, slide 3 comes up and you start talking about X, like the audience is live. You don't say, first I'm going to tell them about this, and then I'm going to tell them about that, and then I'm going to ask them a question. That's a walkthrough or a run through of the slide. A rehearsal is where you pretend the audience is live and you're there in the moment and you actually do it like you're going to do it on the day. Not going to be surprised that it takes a lot less time to do a walkthrough, I should anyway, than a full rehearsal. But a full rehearsal doesn't just take 75% more time. It is 90 times more effective. Like there's no difference in ROI for that. I mean, no comparison. You're way better off rehearsing than you will ever be just doing a run through.
Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting one because for me, I think I prefer a walkthrough just because then it feels like a little bit more human. I think on the other end, the people are kind of changing the words as they go through. You're listening to them, you're responding. But yeah, I guess it depends on the situation, how important the
just understand that there's no like unit of work metric that we can talk about. But let's say that the amount of work units is 100 for our presentation, where between you and the audience, 100 units of work will need to be combined and done so that what you're trying to communicate is put into the audience's head. All right. The more of those units you do for yourself, the less work the audience has to do, the less patient they have to be, and the more clear your message is going to be for them. So while a run through is easier for you and people tell themselves, yeah, but then I get to be a little bit spontaneous and blah, 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 which is absolutely true. What you're doing is you're shifting a lot more of those work units to the audience. They have to wait while you compose a thought. They have to wait while you like stutter and have your crutch words. They have to wait while you like bring up another slide and then quickly read it yourself or remind yourself what it is you're going to talk about. Right? You're putting a lot more of the work units onto their side of the seesaw. And
Sure.
really, you want them to be up in the air the whole time. Like you want all of the weight or as much of it as you can to be on your side of the seesaw. You do more of the work units so that they have to do fewer of the work units.
Got it. That makes sense. I'm sure we could do a whole nother session going into that topic.
Yeah.
But let's wrap that there. We have a bunch of answers. Excited to compare afterwards. But let's go straight into Q&A. I know we've had some questions in the chat, so let's see what we can pull up onto screen here.
Right. Oh, by the way, now you guys do something. I'm sorry to interrupt because
No, please.
you saw the flash where we had the splash screen and it said Q&A and stuff, right? So, I mean, to me, that's like I would use that feature. That's totally cool. It's another topic. We throw it up. I do want to point out for people, besides talking about how something is not the audience's fault and is never the audience's fault completely. One of the other things is we never have a slide during the Q&A session that says questions or Q&A. Like never.
Sure.
Never, ever, ever, ever. I fire any client that insists on it. Like absolutely not. Because so many audiences have been trained by so many speakers for so many years that as soon as the Q&A slide or question slide comes up, if they don't have a question, they're allowed to mentally check out or even physically check out.
Sure. Or
And
open
so
their phone.
we never give the audience permission to check out. And we sure as heck never encourage them to check out. So a splash screen with Q&A is chef kiss, right? Leaving up that thing? No, absolutely not. What you leave up is your call to action screen. And you leave it up the entire time that you're in the Q&A. Like your call to action slide and the entire Q&A period overlap each other directly. Like in a Venn diagram, it's one circle.
Okay.
We call that the linger slide because it lingers for the entire remainder of the webinar until the entire session is torn down.
Okay, I like it. Another Deanism. But okay, let's get into it. I want to do this Q&A so that we have time to answer.
Go for it.
So first question here from Dr. Christopher. Do you have to use emotive and compelling copywriting styles to keep your audience from leaving?
No, absolutely not. In fact, it will turn off a lot of technical audiences. The way, granted, I mean, at my company, right, Best Damn Webinar Company, we have writers and speechwriters who help clients of all sizes do this and create their content. But no, not at all. There are only two things to keep in mind. One, if you use the right structure, and Tim, I think it's next week, we actually go into the actual structure, like basically buckets for content. Put this bucket in here, fill that bucket, and by the time you get to the end, you've got a great CTA that people are going to respond to, right? So structure, and then secondly, I like to make sure that the entire script, if there's going to be a script, is at a fourth grade reading level, an English fourth grade reading level. Fourth grade.
And why so low?
Okay, so there are a few reasons. One, most people are going to listen to a webinar instead of looking what's on screen. I mean, prior to services like Contrast, there wasn't even any way to do anything interesting on screen, right? And so like it was just a static image. So most of them, they can ingest a static image slide in a second or fractions of a second, and then they can go back and clear their inbox or whatever. So they're listening to it. So audible information works great at a fourth grade level. The audience, everything is more visual, everything is shorter, it's more punctuated, it's tighter, it's more assertive, it's more declarative, and it goes right into their head without them having to process very much of it. So that's the main reason why everyone should try to write at fourth grade level. And Microsoft Word and Hemingway app and a lot of sites now will actually in real time show you what the reading level is for your thing. The other thing is I mostly work in tech, which means lots of people who learned English as a second language. And when you're talking to an audience where a large proportion learn English as a second language, keeping everything at fourth grade, no matter how complex the concept is, keeping everything at fourth grade English means that they'll understand it even though it's not their native language.
Got it. That makes
So,
sense.
2 reasons, I guess.
Okay, cool. Great answer. Okay, let's see if we have another question that we can pull up here. Just go through the list. Okay, this one is from Victor S.
I'm letting you have this one.
Okay, yeah, I can take this one.
Okay.
Aren't things that pop up on screen distracting from the main message in a webinar, like quotes? Okay, this is a great one. I think yes, if it's not interesting to look at. But for the next generation of webinars, we're aiming to make the visual part as appealing as the audio part. So you actually just kind of touched on this, Dean.
Yeah.
But that's because, if you think about it, most people go off and do other things during webinars. They're looking at their second screen, they're on a different tab. And it kind of makes sense though. Like, I don't think that my face is particularly interesting to look at for 30 minutes. And I don't even think you would do that in a real conversation.
Yeah.
But a good pop-up or visual, I think, keeps people engaged. And if people are more engaged, then you understand more about them. If you understand more about them, they're more valuable. So we talked through this last time. So it's important for us, at least when we build Contrast, that we put this into our product. And I think it's especially important because it's really expensive and really hard for a company to do this, right? It's so time consuming if you had to make a visual for every single part of your presentation. So the idea is that we solve that for you.
Yeah. I mean, what a lot of people like, they feel it, they intuit it in a marketing department, for instance, or a sales department when they're putting together a webinar, but they never really express it or articulate it to themselves, is that doing a live event like a webinar or an interview is as close as most companies will ever come to producing a live episode of a TV show.
Yep.
And making something visually interesting live is extraordinarily difficult. Just ask anyone involved in theater or any of the performing arts. You almost want something new happening on screen every few seconds, especially since every year people are watching more and more online video. And I mean, the amount of time per day that we spend watching video now is insane, of all types, from YouTube to social media to movies and whatever.
Nonstop, all day.
Right. And like, we expect something to be happening pretty much all the time. And you can't really do that. You can't do it at all on traditional webinar platforms. That's why sort of Band-Aid solutions were brought in. But it takes an enormous amount of work, for instance, to have that many slides or to do animation on slides or whatever, so that you can make that happen. And so it's like producing a live episode of TV. And so anything that makes that easier to do is probably not distracting, but conforming to what people expect, because having to look at someone for 30 minutes, we can't help it. We'll distract ourselves.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
So it's so important to simplify. Okay, that's a great question. Let's see if we can pull up another one. So let's see here. Okay, so this one's from Andre, and it's for you, Dean. Can Dean tell us how he creates a webinar end-to-end from design phase to post-event phase?
Yes. Yes, I can. I know how to do it. I've done it before. Okay, that could be a really long one. Create it from design phase to post-event phase. Okay, so I normally start in the middle. I start with whatever. I start in the middle. If you imagine that every live event has 3 phases, there's a outreach and marketing phase to let people know it exists. There's a live event itself and that content, and then there's the post-event content marketing, really, kind of thing. Whereas it's more advertising in the beginning, it's content marketing at the end. That's the replay video and burning in the captions and getting the transcript done so that you can make a blog post and make it more easily searchable on Google and all the other nice stuff. Creating excerpt videos that you can, and then writing the LinkedIn posts that the client posts up and that kind of stuff. So I start in the middle, which is the live event, if I'm being paid to do the whole thing, because sometimes most of our clients, they pay for the marketing types at the beginning and end. Then the whole thing is more of a full service kind of thing. But then inside the middle part, I start with call to action. And I want to know, and I want to decide what I want the audience to do, right? And you never get everyone in an audience to respond or to a call to action. But the goal is to get everyone in the audience to reply to the call to action. And then once I have that, I can work backwards with all the main points. And then I just fit it into my structure, starting with coming up with the gap, And then the introduction, I do it enough. I know how to introduce myself. It takes like 45 seconds and I'm done. And then going into the positive future parts, and then why it's not their fault, and then geeking out about some technical detail. I like to put in a pivot. We talked last week about the deep dive pivot or the horizontal pivot. If anyone was trying to remember, the deep dive is where you sort of pick one thing about your geeking out section and really flesh it out. The horizontal one was the Etsy thing. We said, like, we make this product, but it turns out people on Etsy are using it for this other thing. Just goes to show how versatile. It's sort of like an entertainment or mental vacation for the audience to do a horizontal pivot, right? And then a little bit about the negative future, and then bring them into the call to action. And then the rest of it is just, once I have that, then the marketing is really simple, because I just follow my own advice around, like, for instance, rope bridges. The email subject line, its only job is to get the email opened. I don't try to educate the entire audience about everything we're going to do in the subject line. And then it gets the email open. The email's job is just to get people to click to the registration page. The registration page job is to make it as easy as possible for them to register. And then, a couple of follow-ups between when they register and when the live event happens, just to keep it at top of mind. Then we move into the live event. And then once it's over, usually within a day or two, an email will go out to everyone who registered with a link to the blog post where we have the replay video with the captions burned in, and the full transcript edited to take out crutch words like and so and right and other things people say, which sound normal when you're listening to it, but when you have to read it, it's like, why is this here? Why am I reading the fact that he says every other sentence or something like that? And then we don't consciously hear a lot of that stuff, but when it's in black and white, you definitely see it, and it gets annoying. Yep. And then some excerpts and little follow-up videos, and then figuring out what we want to do next time. That's the process. Start with the call to action at the end of the middle phase, and then work your way backwards using the structure, and then work on the marketing with the rope bridge concept, and then do the content marketing to remind everyone how great it was.
Okay, it's a great answer. Longer one, and I actually think it's a great segue to wrap this up and kind of push into next week, where we're going to be talking about structure. So again, This week we saw what the audience's reaction should be. Next week we're going to go through what you should be doing in order to say that.
What prompted each one of those thoughts or feelings? Yeah,
exactly. So that's next week on Wednesday, same time, same place, and then we'll have a final session in 2 weeks where Dean, you're going to do a full Q&A.
Whatever anyone wants to ask, shoot.
Yep. So come back for that as well. But thanks, Dean, and I'll see you in 1 week.
See you.